The station, Radio Cayman.
The voice.
The heart. The soul of the Cayman Islands.
Talk Today is brought to you by Subway, open 24 hours in Countryside, Anderson Square in Georgetown, and Centennial Towers in West Bay. And by the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your sister islands. MedLab in Smith Road Plaza, your complete medical laboratory solution. Call 949-7331. And Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village, convenient opening hours including Sundays and holidays.
Radio Cayman's Talk Today, the Cayman Islands' foremost listeners' participation program. We ask our listeners to avoid statements or comments which are abusive, derogatory, malicious, or defamatory. Do not use any indecent language or make any statement which is false or misleading. Email talktoday@candw.ky or call 1-800-534-8255.
Courtesy of Flow.
Cayman's #1 network that connects you to your world like never before.
Let your voice be heard. Once again, here's your host, Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us on What We Build as a thoughtful Thursday. And endeavor is always to engage, invite, include, and ensure that the public informed, maybe somewhat entertained, but always feel welcome to participate. Honored to welcome to the studio Ms. Bridget Kirkconnell, together with Attorney Law James Samuel Jackson. And I say that with pride because as I look at in our communities, increasingly, we need to have people who are not only courageous, but people who possess a certain level of, integrity, honesty, commitment to a community to ensure that such a small community, we're divided. And in such a small community, the littlest thing that you say, I don't like that cake, can be misconstrued and can and will be held against you. And unfortunately, increasingly from the global perspective, we point fingers. And I don't say this to disparage anybody, but just to show how quickly sometimes we adopt certain things. We know our politicians borrowing, I think, from what we've seen internationally in the last couple of years, the phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. It was probably meant to be an innocuous statement, no harm, no foul. But increasingly, if we see sometimes how things unfold, we wonder, was it just an innocent statement made naively? Was it a statement that I can borrow that and apply it? And I share that to ask, again, through both of you, to help me to appreciate that when I tell friends and family, and I've said it publicly, we point fingers at our politicians and we blame them. Many times, probably justifiably. But where are we, the citizen, the voter in particular, whether we become politically engaged or motivated, but where are we, the voter, to keep tabs, to hold accountable, to engage, to ensure that civil society is playing its role and not leave it to them, not blame the politician, the special interests. And worse, this is why I commend you and others, and hopefully there's a growing number globally, but within our own sphere, for being willing to say, hey, I have no axe to grind. I don't have any other objective other than I want a safe, civil, stable, happy society. But nobody's saying anything about this thing, whether it's sexual abuse in your schools, whether it's about co-opted behavior as opposed to corruption, as Mr. Bill Adam sometimes would say, or it's about littering, or it's about government expenditure, or it's about the private sector, or it's about the church. If nobody speaks out, is acquiescence meaning consent and acceptance? Usually, some of you say ladies first, but I think we both would differ, to you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Dwayne, and the listening public. I got to agree that although I did throw my hat in the ring the last election, I did it. Did it knowing that it was a daunting task. It much more so than I thought it to be. Coming out of it than going into it, and I didn't make it into Parliament, and I do have some experience with a number of parliamentarians, so I know and I've shared in their experiences in terms of lending them support and what have you. I've participated as best I could on many occasions with a number of legislative initiatives. So I know it's not easy. I worked in government before. I was sort of support staff for a number of things, including the first building code and the first ever major amendment to the development plan. I was instrumental in revamping this is later on in private practice, the Electricity Regulatory Authority law. All of those things I've done. And I do still have a healthy amount of admiration for those folks who put their name on the line, go out there, take the licks, as we say, and try to put their best foot forward. It is not easy, especially in the political arena in Cayman, to satisfy the number of people, especially since, quite frankly, and I can say this now because I'm not a politician anymore, there are certain expectations that I think are misguided. I think people have the wrong expectations of their representatives. I think they expect them to solve problems that they should perhaps solve themselves, and they expend a tremendous amount of time and public resources distracting their representatives from the real business of the country by asking them to solve what are problems that might have been generated by circumstance or even in certain instances self-inflicted. And I don't envy those folks in Parliament. And I say this as well, for what it's worth. I still have friends in the current government, I believe. Probably less so on the other side of the aisle, for obvious reasons. But I still am willing to engage in any sort of debate, without malice, to try to inform them and the public. As none of us have all answers. But I've had sufficient experience on certain things to allow me to lend my hand, to the parliamentary process. Unfortunately, in this instance, the reason we're here is because we don't feel we've been engaged. We weren't taken seriously enough, to be frank. When we said there's serious fundamental problems with the legislation, which we're about to talk about again today. And I'll leave it to Bridget perhaps to bring us up to speed on where we're at.
Yes,
because there was a meeting we had immediately after leaving the studio the other day that I'd like her to recount. Only because she was there for the whole duration, I had to leave early. But so that we can inform the public of what's transpiring. We're talking about the Identification Register Bill in particular, again, today.
Yeah. Sally, thank you. And Bridget, welcome. And
thank you.
I'm mindful that there's a significant cost to each of us individually by engaging. We're taking it from our families, our businesses, whether we are employers or employees. There's a financial cost, there's a personal cost, because some people malign you because you're aligned with something. But my father always says, if you don't stand for something, not only will you fall for anything, but then what's the point? Now he says it much nicer, but I've taken it on board, and he has his way of imparting his wisdom. But I come in to you because I think from the last discussion, my take, you're saying, hey, it's probably not for us to be engaging in this process because we're not paid, we're not elected, we're not the opposition, we're not the government bringing it forward. But if someone doesn't do something, then who will? And if not now, then when? So for what it's worth, thank you all, man.
Well, good afternoon to your Radio Cayman audience, and especially to all the people that got behind what we did last week and contacted their representatives and rang their phone off the hook, frankly, over the weekend. It was a great response, and it was a great thing that the public got so engaged. A lot of what Sammy said, I agree with, and but for me, I said this the last time. This is not going public is not something I normally do, but it's now a passion of mine, and I really, really am not worried about any fallout at all. It is what it is. I feel like that our freedom is a bit at stake, and I'm not going to be one to let this go that easily, not without a fight. And so it's important that going forward, from what I can tell, the public needs to get engaged, because as Sammy said, we met with the minister. We were grateful for that meeting. We met with him and his team after we were on the radio last Thursday.
So this is Minister Andre Ebanks,
yes,
the sponsor. Okay,
correct.
Okay.
And Sammy did have to leave early. Miss Katina Anglin was with us, so we got to talk about a few things. But the things that we talked about, unfortunately, we don't know what's going to come of what we discussed. We heard him say the following Monday, after everybody rang their phones off the hook over the weekend, that they were going to make changes. But the unfortunate thing is they haven't published those changes. And so this is very, very, very concerning for the public, because not only did we have no real genuine consultation, now the public really is going to have extremely limited input in whatever it is they're going to come with next. And so I would just say to the public, thank you for your support. Keep pushing this, because we need your help.
Well, right after the break, we understand that the Legislative Assembly was in session yesterday. A number of bills are being introduced, going through different readings. I don't know to what extent, my apologies to both of you and the listeners, where this is totally went through its first reading, but nonetheless, I want to talk more about it, maybe get an update, and get the appreciation for public engagement.
We're not sure either. I certainly didn't have the chance to
likewise
to listen, but
There wasn't anything really said on the ID register yet,
okay.
as far as I know.
All right, so when we come back, maybe it's a time for the public and we can talk about it. I always want to learn, I always want to engage and provide a platform, and I stand in the gap. I take my licks, but I'll also protect and provide. For those who are listening, please, call a friend, get your popcorn, be a part of the discussion. Stay tuned for Talk Today.
They say variety is the spice of life, and that's why at Subway we're introducing the new boneless hot sub. Say what? The premium sub brings new ingredients like spicy breaded boneless chicken, French's crispy fried onions, and buffalo wing sauce, bringing a zesty and flavorful experience with every bite. Add some of your favorite veggies, cheese, and ranch sauce of your choice of freshly baked bread for the ultimate boneless hot sub. For a little spice in your life, try the new boneless hot sub from Subway.
So good and tasty.
And make it a meal with a drink and chips or cookies. Subway. Eat fresh.
For medical lab services in Cayman, go straight to MedLab.
For a full range of medical services, pleasant, clean and comfortable environment, no long lines and affordable fees, visit MedLab at the Smith Road Plaza. Open Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and half day on Saturdays. Call 949-7331 to make your appointments.
For medical lab services in Cayman, MedLab.
Your Radio Cayman 6 p.m. news, Monday through Friday, is brought to you by Logic. Your life connected.
Did you know that ValueMed Pharmacy has a free online prescription service? Managing your health and medical requirements has never been easier with ValueMed. Simply visit value-medpharmacy.com. That's VALU-medpharmacy.com and click the Refill Prescriptions tab on our website. Fill in the information for new prescriptions or refills and choose your preferred pickup location. ValueMed on Walkers Road or Town. Then bring in your original prescription from your doctor when picking up. There's no need to stand in line and wait for your prescription. Save time and pick up prescriptions at your convenience by visiting value-medpharmacy.com. That's VALU-medpharmacy.com.
Wouldn't it have been grand if you had purchased land 30 years ago? It may not be 2020, but a perfect vision has never been more clear. Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, poised for growth with an eye on the future. Your land, your history, your future. Discover all that our sister islands have to offer.
Attention all food vendors, farmers, artisans and craftspeople. The Ministry of Culture and Heritage invites you to take part in the Cayman Christmas, a celebration of culture and music. It's happening on Wednesday, the 14th of December from 5 p.m. until 9 p.m. at the West Bay Heritage Park. Vendor stalls are free. All interested vendors must register by tomorrow, Friday, the 9th of December. Call 623-8825 for further details.
The Kirk Freeport Christmas Sweepstakes is back again, and for our 50th anniversary, we are giving away $50,000 in cash and prizes. Win one of 3 $5,000 cash prizes, a daily cash prize of $1,000, the Rolex draw on January 4th, or loads of other great prizes. Every purchase of $100 before noon on Christmas Eve qualifies for all remaining prize draws. Win your share of $50,000 of cash and prizes in the anniversary sweepstakes. Full details on KirkFreeport.com. Merry Christmas from everyone at Kirk Freeport.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Good afternoon, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. And in the studio, we have Attorney at Law Sammy Jackson. We have Bridget Kirkconnell sitting with us. The phone lines are open. We will take your calls. I would ask you to help me to ensure that we all get a chance to share. We're talking about two of the many bills that are before the Legislative Assembly: the Identification Register Bill and the Cayman Islands Identification Card Bill. Let's keep our points as succinct as possible in our discussion to that topic. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thanks for calling.
Good afternoon, Sterling.
Hey, good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
Fine, and good afternoon to your panel.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm not calling to disrespect any one of you or
yes,
what I say to degrade what you all is trying to say.
Yes,
I'm just asking a question. Are you all is saying in so many words that this ID should be looked into more before the government bring it forward? Is that what you all...
Absolutely.
Yep.
And we have a number of reasons why we say that's the case.
Okay. All right. I understand 100% now. Now, I just want to put in my input, okay? We, as the Cayman Islands, everything that could beneficial the island, it is always something to try to throw it back that it doesn't come forward. And I'm not saying that directed to you guys. I'm just talking in general. Please don't misunderstand my conversation, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
So what I'm saying is, a young lady said to me the other day, in Trinidad we got this national ID and it works very well. And she don't see why it can't work in the Cayman Islands. And I'm not fully understanding what's happening. I'm just getting no peace. So, we got to work with your passport. Voter's ID is not enough. Your driver's license is not enough. And me personally, I don't see anything wrong with it because it's a very good ID to say you're a Caymanian, you whatever nationality you are, because the passports, when someone gets married a Caymanian, they put in the passport or status to marriage. So anything more embarrassing in that is to have your passport status to marriage in your passport. Yeah. So to one more minute, I'll let you say what you got to say.
Yes, ma'am. No, go ahead,
so
ma'am.
I just want to say that we need to change a lot of things to better our island and to protect our people. And if people don't have anything to hide, it shouldn't be a problem to have a national ID for the Cayman Islands. And I think we, the people, need to try to come together more, give the government some rights when they're trying to do something. We always saying that the government, past, present, future, is not doing anything for the Cayman Islands. And as soon as they try to do something for the Cayman Islands, a lot of people rise up against it. And I'm not for no side. Don't get me wrong.
No, fair enough.
Okay?
But I think
so much.
You're most welcome. And I think you mentioned something that I believe many of us labor under. So as I try to ask, but I'm pretty sure we'll elicit from both Bridget and Sammy. We'll get an answer. Thank you very much, Mom. To the caller's last point, there are two bills, and it would appear that many of us believe that they're one and the same, and as best I can try to explain it as I've understood it. We have the identification card, which I would say that's a good thing. You can identify who's Caymanian. And secondly, but there's this other, I don't want to say companion or complementary, you guys tell me, identification register. And someone said, well, why do we need one in order to get the card? Why do we need to register to get the identity card? And can they stand alone? And is it some have alleged that they're using the card, the identification card, as the carrot to distract you? Some would say the red herring. Sammy, you on your last appearance referenced the registered land law, and Attorney Christopher Perry earlier had a similar discussion and talking about the two bits of legislation. Is it then that we need, in order to get the identification card, that everybody wants to identify whether you work permit, whether you Caymanian, you don't have to produce this thing from the immigration office, which many of us find insulting? Is it that we need both of these to do it? What is the concern?
No, we have, I mean, you would assume that government would work on the basis of efficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clarity and transparency and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So if this initiative, these two bills, is truly about focusing on implementing a national ID card,
mm-hmm.
that's easily done. I think it's probably easily done based on the information they already have,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, those of us who've applied for passports and driver's licenses and all that, we've happily given up our identification information
mm-hmm.
In order to have the privilege of a passport or the convenience of a passport and a driver's license accordingly. Mm-hmm. This is not what this discussion is about at all. Mm-hmm. This is about why it is that we have an accompanying bill with the National ID card bill that creates a registry, a register, and a registrar that goes far beyond, obviously, goes far beyond the scope of performing the functions of servicing and maintenance of the national ID card system.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what made us suspicious to begin with. We've asked a number of questions. I've gone through the legislation now. I literally have a point by point. I could sit here for the rest of the day and read through my analysis of the problematic provisions.
Mm-hmm.
I am, in fact, going to publish what I've produced
mm-hmm.
for whoever wants to use it. If the opposition finally wants to wake up and actually do their job and contest this bill, because, look, the whole reason we have a parliamentary process that is, like the court system, adversarial, is so that we can thrash out issues with proposed legislation and hopefully produce better legislation. No government ever produces a perfect bill. I remember Mr. Truman Bodden telling me that back in the 90s when we were passing amendments to the development plan law. He said, we don't need to get it perfect, We just need to get it as right as possible, and we can always amend it.
But didn't we say that with the Constitution, half a loaf's better than no loaf?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
that's... And even that half a loaf we don't use.
Whereas John Joe, right?
Yeah.
Full of...
Yeah.
Miss Bridget?
Well, to the lady's point, what's wrong with it? It's not that, it's what this legislation will enable the government to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it is going to be able to expand its powers massively. And so, like, for example, if you look at the Premier's pin that he wears, that is, a lot of people don't know, but that is a pin that is, I think, given from the UN, and it relates to their Sustainable Development Goals. And there's 17 of those goals, and number 16 of the 17 is the UN wants to have every human being by 2030 to have an ID code. And this is not conspiracy. You can go and find it very, very easily. It's there, right? And so I was looking at it yesterday, and a couple. So first they have to give us an ID code, but then after that, one of the targets of what they want to do is give everybody access to basic health and education services. That sounds great. So, but one of the things that they have there is the tracking of TB and HIV/AIDS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thought it was quite interesting. On Saturday morning, I saw an article in Cayman News Service that kind of took me by surprise, because our government is now concerned about an emergency situation with AIDS. I don't remember how they said it exactly, but apparently they now want the ability to surveil the population.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's what they say. They say the Ministry of Health and Wellness is now pushing for the collection of data for the purpose of ensuring that programming and intervention are data-driven and can play a key role in HIV prevention and treatment. Strengthening our surveillance of the incidence of HIV and AIDS within our jurisdiction is, of course, one of our key outputs from an epidemiological perspective. So, as a Caymanian, how are they going to surveil me, right? If this is so important, and it all, when you look at it, it all ties back to you cannot be surveilled without an ID code. You go to the law that they're proposing, and in the law, and Sammy can quote it, I believe it's section 29, they're clear that your data can be used for the purposes of making public policy, okay? They also brought up the idea of a mandatory cancer registry. They brought that up early in November. And so I'm beginning to see where all of a sudden our government wants to surveil us. Now, how are they going to do that? I can see how they surveil work permit holders because they're subjected to all this testing. But anyway, so back to the lady's point. Well, what's the harm in it? The harm in it, in my view, is what does it enable the government to do further down the line or tomorrow?
Can I ask, and as Samuel shows us, the law, and like to your point, Bridget, and I'm mindful because I think many of us appreciate that the freedoms we enjoy came at great cost. If Mr. Loxlow Banks and the other veterans, they've been here many times, and greatest respect for their service, whether they're the British Armed Services or the US or wherever, to champion those freedoms and democracy. So I don't take that lightly. There was a time not long ago when there was great stigma attached to AIDS and HIV. I don't know if many realize this, but I had, in the early days, with my AIDS Foundation, a number of discussions trying to get away from that stigma, only to have some people publicly say, well, you must be connected somehow, and while you were an advocate. I thought, wow, I didn't realize that. Just by association facilitating that discussion publicly, people assume that you have some horse in the race, people can infer what they want. And only to appreciate that those who were going to get tested for HIV AIDS, for whatever reason, for marriage or whichever, they felt stigmatized. Someone on the air called and said, well, you wouldn't, feel that way because you had nothing to worry about. And I thought, well, let me go. At that point, you went to GP, you waited in line, you got registered, and you said to the person, hey, I want to do HIV AIDS test. And then you realize there are people right next to you. And we moved it across the hall a little bit, and it was a little bit more private. But people felt that stigma. I want to share that to ask if there was a stigma then, and we're now tracking it now or propose to track it, would we create the stigma and ostracize, further make people feel that they should shy away from it because potentially they could suffer consequences? Now, the final thing I want to ask, is it that we have now taken away from the work permit renewal process the need to provide the HIV AIDS testing as was the case previously, so you can have your work permit renewed or approved without that being part of the process?
No, it's still part of the process.
Okay, still part of the process.
It is. So what they've done, and I don't know, Sammy, do you want to take this? Okay, because I looked into this.
Okay.
So what they've done recently, work permit holders, I think up until about October, had to do that big 3-page exam. Okay. I assume that for the protection of the individual, they've gone to a simple 1-page form. You go to your GP, and the GP has a 1-page document, and they still have to test you for HIV. They have to test you for TB, but the doctor then gives you just a sign-off sheet that. So my employee would bring that sheet to me. I can't read their medical information. I just see that the doctor signed off that they're in good health. However, it appears to me that the form that the doctor fills out is part of what belongs to the to work, and the doctor fills in whether or not that person in some database has TB, AIDS, whatever, right? So that's how they're going to, I assume, I'm asking the question, I believe that's how they're going to surveil work permit population.
I would assume that the fact that if you were to be so brave as to disclose on your work permit form that you have, because you're forced to, by threat of penal sanction, that you have HIV, AIDS, or tuberculosis, that would probably disqualify you for a permit. Mm-hmm. But the bigger point here is that we're missing is we're talking about two different things. We're talking about a regime, a work permit form regime where you are required to declare that you don't have these things, or if you do, that you have them, and you as an applicant can elect to not disclose it and walk away from the permit.
Yeah.
Right? What contrast that with what we're confronted with in this bill, which is a mandatory regime. And I'm going to come back and tell you why I say it's still that way, even though we were told it was voluntary from day one. Now they've changed the shall to may, all of that. But we're talking about a mandatorily implemented regime that will force every resident in this country to disclose whatever information this government and any future government decides is relevant to the registration process.
Yep.
For it to be stored and managed by whoever the government
and shared.
First of all, stored and managed by whoever the government chooses, and shared with whoever the government chooses, and farmed out. The data itself can be, and I'll tell you why I say that, can be outsourced. The data management itself can be outsourced. That is built into the legislation to the private sector, and the law includes provisions for payment for access. So what you're talking about is the sale of personal data. That is a remarkable encroachment into the constitutional right to privacy. For me, that's 10 steps too far. So whilst we were all distracted conveniently, and I'm not suggesting this is why the government did it, but it's a tempting conclusion to come to. When you create two pieces of legislation, you run them in tandem. One looks like it's the other. It's titled like the other. You were told that they need to go together, but one is much more massively draconian than the other in terms of its reach, its massive, constitutional reach or overreach. Then we have a problem because we're talking about fundamental rights. Everyone has the right to privacy. We have that built into our constitution. I can read it in there if necessary. So when the question's asked why we are obstructing government, we're not. We think we're helping government to ensure that they don't breach the constitution, because guess what? They swore an oath of office to not do so. Right? Okay. And it may well be that they're barreling down the road of promulgating legislation that they haven't fully considered the implications of it. And I'll tell you why I think that there have been some enhancements. I can show you a provision where the wording is so disjointed that it appears that there's was subsequent to the original bill being framed out, that there was additional layers of legislation overlaid into it, right? And we'll come to that in a minute. But when you have a bill like this that says that you are required to disclose identification information and related facts, and then when you look at the definition of related facts and you see that says any information required for any other purpose prescribed by regulations, that means that leaves a blank checkbook, so to speak, for the government to come back and require information for any purpose to be registered in this register, where it is in fact built into the legislation that there is a duty of the register to contract third parties in the private sector, perhaps, to help the register manage it. It's literally written in the law. And I'll take it to that in a minute. But I just want to make the general point. We are not opposed. I said this from the last appearance on the show. We're not fundamentally opposed to our ID card. We have all forms of ID cards. They have ID cards. But if you're talking about an ID card that comes with it, the requirement to give up all of your personal data,
including medical information,
medical, financial, what have you.
Okay.
And it's not a question of what you have to hide. It's a question of what you're entitled to keep private. That's where we need to start thinking of as citizens. We have rights, right? We're not drones. We shouldn't be locked up on a whim. I don't want to get into that discussion. You know my views on that. We spent 6 hours, I believe, on the air about that during the lockdown.
Yeah.
But what we need to understand here is that we have rights, and we, any time that a government intends to encroach on those rights, we as citizens have a duty to stand up. Because guess what? You don't sit on your backsides and let legislation be passed and then complain about it after the fact, because that achieves nothing, right? And a lot of us have become so complacent in that regard. We all are busy. And the sad fact is that a vast majority of the people in this country are forced into circumstance. And the most obvious one is the one that I encountered the last day and today, traffic. We have so many of our citizens now, particularly in the eastern districts, that spend a large part of their day coming to work and going home from work with their families. They don't have time to read this stuff. That's why I feel motivated, right, to share what knowledge I can glean from this with the public.
Thank you.
So that they don't have to do that, right? And credit to Bridget, she brought it to me. It probably would have passed me by too, you know. To be honest with you, I would probably not have the time because I'm busy. I have my own little business. I'm trying to keep afloat. So like everyone else that has a business of a similar size, it's not easy. And when I started looking at it, I was shocked because it isn't the form, it isn't the style and form of legislation that it should be if all that is intended is to give birth to a national ID card.
Okay.
So I started feeling duped, and the more I have conversations with people who are supporting it, right, in particular the technocrats, who are quite frankly, and with no disrespect to either one of the two gentlemen in particular that we spoke to the last time, because I like them both, and you know one of them is a good friend of mine. This is not their bailiwick. This isn't their wheelhouse. We're talking about statutory construction, right? And you gotta look at the law in detail and think about what it says and what it permits. And a lot of times the legislation is not just what it says, but what it doesn't say. I have a couple of examples of that if we have time to go into the detail.
The construction of it and the like, right?
Correct.
I think can we take one call quickly, perhaps? If the caller would be, okay. All right, if the caller would be respectful, we want to get everybody. We got the news. Let's take this call quickly. Welcome, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. Okay, the next one. Welcome, good afternoon.
Good evening, Dwayne, and good evening to your panel.
Afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Both related, really, to hear you both on the air today, but I have a couple of points I want to raise, Dwayne, but it's going to take more than 2 minutes. Is it possible I can wait till after the commercial break?
Yeah, but get started. I mean, Ms. Susan, you got 2 minutes and we can get through it if you want. Yeah, start with it if you wish.
Okay.
All right.
I just want to, I thank you immensely, and Bridget, you both, for your public and bold stand. Yesterday we were listening to the House, the new sitting, and there was some great contention about this new discussion about marijuana and gambling. And I must tell those listening that what Sammy and Bridget is bringing up here is far exceeding this discussion that was in the House yesterday. And here's an example. This national ID system is so far-reaching and grave to our security. For example, when you have a national security issue, which such as COVID, they were trying to push this vaccination passport, and those who were not vaccinated, for whatever the reasons, were greatly ostracized and prejudiced at the highest levels. Now, think about a national security issue. It could be a hurricane, it could be an earthquake, it could be a tsunami, whatever, that triggers this National Security Act, that the government has sole discretionary control with the use of this national ID system. And for whatever reason they want to get information, and the protest, whatever. If you all remember, there was a protest against the vaccinations recently. And people wanted freedom of choice, right? With this type of technology, and by the way, there was an article in yesterday's paper about the law enforcement enhancing their vehicle capture technology, which is also looking to install facial recognition data software. So you compound this type of technology and you put this into one interface, and you have a people who is disgruntled about something, and they have all these new technologies on every street corner, and you're disgruntled about these things. You want to stand up for your rights, whatever the rights are that you feel that you're disagreeing with. And this information is pooled. If you can go back to what happened in Canada when the truckers had this great issue with the government, and they boycotted and they were campaigning for their rights. Did you all notice how the banks, with the government, froze assets, financial assets?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. You notice how quickly that happened, and that was under the National Emergency Act. So I see here, Sammy and Bridget and Dwayne, a great constitutional breach, but it's not even coming in the form of a constitutional issue just yet, because this is just the introduction. And I want us to consider what happened to Nigeria. Nigeria rolled out back in 2019 their national ID system, yeah? And they called it the ENAIRA, which is the ENAIRA program. And there's a documentary out there that shows how Nigeria also introduced this program in a very basic, voluntary way. Some 3 years later, they're screaming about the government abuses that has since reformed radically from the original onset. And they're saying that so much prejudices and abuses has been taking place because of the digital ID being fused with the bankers, I can't remember the name of it, Nigeria's National Bank or something. Right? Mm-hmm. And so now they're forcing and compelling people to go in certain directions that the government wants to move in. Mm-hmm. There's also another report come out from the Bank of International Settlements that is now forcing countries around the world to roll out this national ID and to compound it with their digital currencies. So I too share the concerns out there. Not that the national ID in itself there's anything wrong with it. I've always accepted that. Right. But it's the registry and the capacity for it to be, for the scope of it to be enlarged tomorrow.
Right. Well, I appreciate
today. Tomorrow it can be a totally different beast to work with. So thank you, Sammy and Bridget, for your work. God bless you both.
Thank you. That caller is perfect. So and can I say one thing?
Right.
If I could follow on, I found it.
You want to do it after the
news?
Sure.
But thank you, caller. Right. That was great.
So the cliffhanger. What will Bridget say when you come back?
Nothing that great.
Stay tuned for Talk Today.
Today's biggest news.
Radio Cayman. Your voice, your choice.
Local, regional, international. This is Headlines from Radio Cayman's newsroom.
Today's biggest news.
A government motion to support a referendum on national lottery and decriminalization of small quantities of cannabis was voted 16 in favor, 1 abstention and 1 absentee in Parliament on Wednesday. The referendum will go forward and a date will be announced in due course. Good afternoon, I'm Dion Anglin with your headlines in news elsewhere. The U.S. and Russia have exchanged jailed U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner for notorious arms dealer Victor Bout, held in an American prison for 12 years. U.S. President Joe Biden said Griner was safe and on a plane home from the United Arab Emirates. Griner was arrested at a Moscow airport in February for possessing cannabis oil and last month sent to a penal colony. The Biden administration proposed a prisoner exchange in July, aware Moscow had long sought Bout's release. And Celine Dion has revealed she has been diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, SPS, a rare neurological disorder with features of an autoimmune disease. The French-Canadian singer told her 5.2 million Instagram followers the condition makes her muscles spasm uncontrollably. It also left her with difficulties walking and singing, she said, meaning she will be unable to play planned shows in the UK and Europe next year. That's a wrap of your headlines. I'm Dion Anglin.
For the latest in news and information,
follow Radio Cayman on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Download the Radio Cayman app or log on to our website, radiocayman.gov.ky. From boat days to beach gatherings, leave the catering to Subway. Choose from small and large sandwich platters, double meat wrap platters, and top it off with optional cookie platters for dessert. Or ask about our Subway box to go with the option of 6-inch or foot-long sandwich, 1 cookie, and 1 bag of chips. for all occasions and celebrations. Let Subway focus on the food so you can focus on the fun. Visit subway.ky for catering options. Subway. Eat fresh.
For medical lab services in Cayman, go straight to MedLab. Blood test, x-ray and mammogram, all of that is MedLab. Affordable fees and friendly service, a full professional team. MedLab is always comfortable, MedLab is always clean. For medical lab services in Cayman, MedLab.
You know, Savannah Pharmacy saved my life.
Really? Was it the medication they got you?
No, not this time. I forgot my wife's birthday. They were the perfect place for last-minute shopping.
That's one way to give yourself heart failure. Don't wait last minute for Christmas. Savannah Pharmacy is stocked up for Christmas right now. Gifts for men, women, and children. Home decor, clothes, toys for all ages, fragrances, candles, handbags, and so much more. I was there the other day, and trust me, they'll even wrap all your presents too.
Savannah Pharmacy, a lifesaver in more ways than one.
Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village provides you with more than just prescriptions. Always just around the corner with everything your family needs for this holiday season. WhatsApp your prescription refills to 929-5045.
Radio Cayman is pleased to feature this special Sister Islands historical vignette brought to you by the Ministry of District Administration and Lands. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your Sister Islands.
Born in Creek, Cayman Brac on the 25th of September 1939, Henry Mansfield Connolly was the third of 8 children for Henry Kitchener and Olive Connolly. Following a 30-year career with National Bulk Carriers, he was one of few Brackers who worked with Cayman Energy Company doing the ship-to-ship oil transfers off the island in the 1980s. Following a medical injury, he retired from sea and started his own plumbing engineer company, C&H Plumbing, which he owned for 16 years. Prior to relocating to Grand Cayman, he was a volunteer during hurricane emergencies, assisting with the safety of the elderly in his district. Mr. Connolly was one of the original band members of the famous Brac Beach Boys, a member of the Sister Islands Veterans and Seamen's Society, and also a member of the Seafarers Association on Grand Cayman. In 2003, he was one of 500 Seamen Medal honorees for their contribution to the Southwell years.
Radio Cayman is pleased to feature this special Sister Islands historical vignette brought to you by the Ministry of District Administration and Lands. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your Sister Islands.
Explore your history.
Busy. Feel like there's not just enough hours in the day. Savannah Pharmacy, service to make your life easier. Now you can WhatsApp your prescription order to 929-5045. And pickup is just around the corner with everything your family needs and convenient opening hours including Sundays and holidays. WhatsApp your prescription order to 929-5045. Savannah Pharmacy, wholesome values with modern conveniences.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back, and thank you all for listening. And I want you to not just feel included, but if I might say, obligated to share, ask a question, make a comment, so that we inform. Thanks very much to Sam Jackson and Bridget Colonel for being with us. I think, Sam, as we talk about the, what's it called, the identification register bill and the Cayman Islands identification card bill, that, as the caller earlier shared, it seems many of us think they're one and the same, and in order to get the ID card, which we think is a good thing, we need to have the register. It would appear, if I'm understanding correctly, that the the identification register bill includes a lot of other things, potentially breaching the Constitution, perhaps infringing on personal and privacy rights, perhaps an overreach that could lead to taxation, disclosure information that are concerning. Is that sort of the gist of it?
It is. And the thing is, back to this two bills thing, right? We've asked that question.
Okay.
Point blank. Why do you need two bills? We're told it's necessary without any explanation. And we're told that by non-legal qualified people. So the problem I have is we have yet to hear anything from along the lines of the Law Reform Commission, the Legislative Drafting Department, or any of that sort of thing, which is one of the reasons we wanted it postponed, so we could have an in-depth engagement on specific aspects of this bill, because we looked at them by then. We've looked at them a little more closely now, and our concerns have been exacerbated, right? I say this, I don't get why the government feels the burning desire to railroad this legislation through, right? They're now taking a referendum for cannabis, a very vague referendum for cannabis and for gambling. I caught some of the debate on that in the car yesterday, going from one meeting to the next. But that led me to wonder if those two things are being bundled with this now, so they provide the public with a distraction, because those are hot button topics, right? And I heard the I don't want to call him de facto leader of the opposition, Alden, saying that he made a very good point, which is the provisions of those or the framing, the way those things were framed were too vague, and they needed some specificity. And he made reference to the fact that if the government thought it was getting heat on this other bill, and he didn't remember the name, he was referring to this one, I believe. Someone told him what it was, that they should tidy those things up first. That was the gist of what he was saying, and that's correct. But if the fact remains, this to me personally, is much more dangerous, right? It's much more important than determining right now and here and now whether we should have a referendum for either ganja or gambling. Those two things have been bandied about, promised by some, denied by others for a very long time. They will continue to be a source of much debate going forward. I commend Parliament on getting a unanimity that they got yesterday to move them forward. Apparently it was a unanimous vote and they were going to move
one
forward.
Abstention, one something, yeah.
Something of that sort.
Yes, sir.
But hopefully now that is gone, that we can focus on this, because this needs some intense focus, primarily because this bill, right, if we can drill into down to the minutiae of it. Before I do that, though, I want to ask a question which hopefully the government will answer at some point. Bearing in mind that we went to great pains to create a very robust legislative framework in the form of the Data Protection Act, which has enshrined in it some very solid principles upon which the information which is disclosed under that act has to be managed, protected, etc. It also has some very, very significant fines to the order of $100,000 for first instance offences. And when you understand, as I do, the doctrine of implied repeal, and I'll explain what that means for those in the public who don't understand. The doctrine of implied repeal is where Parliament arises where Parliament passes a piece of legislation that conflicts with existing legislation. If you don't, as Parliament, provide expressly in the new legislation that this law shall not derogate from this provision, except where it is expressly provided in the law, etc. Or alternatively, if you don't say the Data Protection Act is hereby repealed, the doctrine of implied repeal arises, and the way it operates is wherever there's a conflict between the two pieces of legislation, the newer one in time prevails. Yeah. So when you implement a new piece of legislation that overlays in terms of scope and nature of the legislation itself, the previous legislation being the Data Protection Act, there is real cause for concern that you are at least in part repealing, that is to mean destroying any opportunity of enforcement. Let me put it bluntly.
Okay.
The existing Data Protection Act. So I want to ask the government, has there been any detailed consideration of the implications of this registration regime now being proposed on the effect that will have on the existing Data Protection Act? Because if they haven't done that, they need to do it. Because I can tell you, just from a cursory glance at the Data Protection Act, you can see that there's overlap. And you can see as well that whereas someone who seeks to, even tries to obtain protected data under the Data Protection Act is exposed immediately to a $100,000 fine, a government employee who willingly discloses protected information under the new proposed law, is only subject to a $10,000 or $20,000 fine. Now, how do you reconcile those two things? Why are we watering down the data protection provisions of the Data Protection Act? Why are we replacing them effectively by overlaying a registration process which would then effectively usurp or undermine much of the ambit of the Data Protection Act? Why herald this act as, it's great protectionism? I'll read you the principles. First principle: personal data should be processed fairly. In addition, personal data may be processed only if, in every case, at least one of the conditions set in paragraphs 1 to 6 of the schedule is met. Second principle: personal data shall be obtained only for one or more specified lawful purposes, and shall not be further processed in any manner incompatible with that purpose or those purposes. The third principle: personal data should be adequate, relevant, and not excessive in relation to the purpose or purposes for which they are collected or processed. Personal data shall be accurate and, where necessary, kept up to date. Fifth principle: personal data processed for any purpose shall not be kept for longer than is necessary for that purpose. Sixth principle: personal data shall be processed in accordance with the rights of data subjects under this Act. Seventh principle: appropriate technical and organizational measures should be taken against unauthorized or unlawful processing of data protection, against any accidental loss or destruction of or damage to personal data. Eighth principle: personal data should not be transferred to a country or territory unless that country or territory ensures an adequate level of protection for the rights and freedoms of data subjects in relation to the process of personal data. And then it goes on. I read those things to make the point, Dwayne. We went to great pains to promulgate the Data Protection Act. It is a very powerful piece of legislation, necessarily so, given all of the sensitive information. We deal in information on a daily basis. No one should know that better than the Minister of Financial Services. So I think some answer to this question is due. Have you considered the possibility that this legislation, this new proposed legislation, could severely impair the legislative framework under the Data Protection Act? If you haven't done that exercise, you're acting in dereliction of your duty. I'll say it again. If, as the Minister of Financial Services, you have not done that exercise, you are acting in dereliction of your duty to this country and all of the people who are relying blindly and faithfully on the protections offered to them by the Data Protection Act. That's the first exercise that should have been done. And I can tell you, when you look in detail at the provisions of this new bill, there is significant overlap, the consequence of which I believe hasn't been thought through properly, and the consequence of which could be very damning for this country.
And financial services is important for its...
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Wow, fantastic.
Wow.
Can I add something to that a bit? So Sammy referred to the meeting that we had with the minister after we were on the air last Thursday, and then he had to leave. But I was there with Miss Katina Anglin, and you will remember that they keep telling us, oh, but you're in control of your data, and if it's breached, then you have recourse. And so I was able to ask the question, okay, more and more my correspondence with government entities, I don't know who I'm corresponding with. It's just, I'm going to just say Immigration Department. There's no name, so I don't know who I'm talking to. So my question was, well, if I go online and I see that, immigration was looking at my data, how will I know who it was that was looking at my data? And the answer was, you will not know who was looking at your data because that person has a right to privacy, okay? So meanwhile, they've gone into my data, and it doesn't matter how far I go, whoever was snooping, I'll never know. I'll just know they worked in that department. But I don't even know the process to file, because I can guarantee it will not be easy. When you make an inquiry, well, what were you doing in there? Mm-hmm. It's going to be a long process. But I was not happy to hear that that person has a right to privacy that has snooped in my records when my privacy has been,
violated?
Violated, yeah.
Wow.
Well, all sorts of purposes, stated purposes in this draft legislation, right? One that caught my eye was, the purpose of the register is to enable or facilitate interoperability between the registrar and public authorities for the purpose of efficient public administration. I don't find a problem with that. Or policy development. We got to wonder, what is that all about? Mm-hmm. Is there going to be a fishing expedition?
Yeah, just bring that mic a little bit closer. I want to make sure people hear you properly. I mean, I know that it overlaps onto your paper, but
I sound deafening to myself.
No, you can turn it down, man. Get our mic, So make sure it's good.
I'm saying, what is this policy development thing all about? Mm-hmm. What is that about? Is the government going to access? Government authorities can generally access your information for a wide range of reasons under this draft legislation, and they, in many instances, you won't be entitled to even ask the registrar or his delegate or assignee. And I'll come back to tell you what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Who is looking at your data? And if it includes things like policy development, that's a pretty nebulous thing. It could be anything. So government decides, we need to look at the viability of income tax or property tax. Well, let's go look in the register and see what we have in terms of net worth. And they go on this huge dredging of information in the register. And every one of us are oblivious to it because we don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Do you think that's right for the government to be able to do that with your data that they promised to protect? That when previous to this legislation, they were prohibited by the principles set out, enshrined in the Data Protection Act, and by guaranteed by your constitutional right under Section 9 of the Constitution to private life. They weren't permitted, right, to infringe upon those things, and they can then use it against you. Well, to some people that might seem acceptable, right? I'm sadly, I admit, I know that there are a lot of folks in the world who have been conditioned to accept now the will of their governments, but that's not what I signed up for, and I think I know a lot of folks who didn't sign up for that. And it's not about being an anarchist or a rebel or anything like that. It's about simply obtaining some respect from your government.
In that, it reminds me,
especially we have stated, rights enshrined in a constitution.
Yeah. I had a couple of conversations recently with individuals from whom I seek out to try to help to enlighten me and give me a perspective. Doesn't always mean I agree nor that I understand in the first instance, but a number of sort of students of history and political students and the like, there were a couple of discussions that seemed, even though separate, seemed to be connected in the sense that when we heard the word lobbyists, we have these paid individuals who will lobby government, become special interest to ensure legislation is either passed or amended to reflect that particular industry or that thing. And in the context, some have shared it in the Cayman context. As a developing, maturing democracy, we may have sometimes, innocently, inadvertently, the politician who advocates on behalf of the private sector to facilitate certain things, thereby serving as de facto lobbyists. And the question was asked, well, is it then right for the politician? Ms. Bridget?
Well, I have an opinion on that, but that's because I read an article, and this, it seems to me, is being pushed by the financial industry because for the KYC benefits, and I think that some of them plan to become the certificate authorities so they then will authenticate our data, as far as I understand it. So I believe that, look, other lobbies have happened, but I believe that the financial industry in this instance is an extremely powerful lobby, and they want it for what they perceive. And Mr. Taryn Jackman said it in an article that I have somewhere in here for the perceived KYC benefits that it gives them. But I do not want them to benefit from my data. And, they've now identified something that they feel can grow their industry. So therefore, government provides them the legislation. Now I have to give them my data that they can make money off of. And you see what I'm saying. So I'm not trying, we need the financial industry. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, as far as I can tell, the biggest driver of wanting this to happen is the financial industry. And I was going to add something to that, but could I just add to that the UK, they are having the same issues that we have, right? They have stopped this national ID register because they don't have their data protection worked out either. So why are we rushing into this? So this issue has been live in the UK since about, as far as I can tell, about 2005. And in 2010, Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg said this: "The wasteful, bureaucratic, and intrusive ID card scheme represents everything that has been wrong with government in recent years. By taking swift action to scrap it, we are making it clear that this government won't sacrifice people's liberty for the sake of ministers' pet projects. Canceling the scheme and abolishing the National Identity Register is a major step in dismantling the surveillance state." Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, May 2010. So anybody who thinks that we're a bunch of conspiracy theorists about this surveillance, it's all over. You just have to read it. And I have other quotes from, I believe, Theresa May in here. I think that's who it is. This provides a surveillance tool for the government.
But the UK hasn't been able to pass this legislation, have they?
They've stopped it. They parked it. So what are we doing?
Massive issues that I remember. I obviously admit I don't know exactly what the terms or what the scope of the legislation was, but I remember as early as 2001, post 9/11, or early 2002, George W. Bush was trying to promulgate legislation of this nature, national ID legislation in the U.S. In the midst of all of that, the emotions from the 9/11 attacks, when they were able to promulgate massive pieces of legislation or significant encroachments into human rights, like the Patriot Act, for example. And despite that environment, that legislative environment, they weren't able to get that legislation passed through their houses then. So if they haven't been able to do it, the UK hasn't been able to do it. Jamaica did it and got sued successfully. I think someone has said it's been declared. I haven't been following that.
I haven't followed. Katina knows that one.
We do know, though, enough to know that this is a seriously problematic piece of legislation. All the more reason we thought why the government should exercise the requisite common sense and postpone the promulgation of this legislation so we can ask the painful questions and hopefully get some meaningful answers. What I got from the minister the other day at the meeting that I had to leave early was, well, if you present me with the problem sections as you see them, then I'll be able to answer you on that. I tried nailing him down a couple of times on well, are you saying that your government is adverse to postponing this legislation and engaging in meaningful public consultation, town halls or what have you? Just do that so that at least then you can say, hand on heart, you did engage the public and not just those special interests, right? Now, that seemed to have fallen on deaf ears. What has happened is that there now, we understand because we haven't seen them, there is a proposal to make 2 amendments, I believe. One of them is in section 3.2 to change the word shall. Remember we talked about that the last day? The implications of that, because we were told, I was told point blank by a couple of people, no, you got that wrong. In fact, one of the individuals in that meeting that afternoon was still saying, right? Well, no, the registration isn't mandatory, and I'm sorry, right? But you don't need to be a legal luminary to understand the meaning of the word shall. So now we hear it's going to be changed to may. That's a tacit admission, at least, that we were being lied to. We were being misinformed, right? Maybe being lied to is too strong a term. We were being misinformed, or somebody, for some reason, didn't want to accept the obvious. But here's the thing. That does nothing to solve the problem. Here's why. That doesn't solve the concern of mandatory or forced participation in this registration scheme, because the changing the word shall to may still doesn't expressly say that a citizen has a right to opt out of it.
Consent.
Right? It doesn't preclude that. And in any event, even if it did, government still has the ability through coercive means to ensure registration. We talked about that the last time too. How does that work? Here's how it works. You go to a government department to get a service that you're entitled to get as a citizen, and they say, no, we can't help you unless you have that ID card and you're registered under that regime, and you give them all your personal data in accordance with that law. That's how this law contemplates it working, right? And that is, I guarantee you that is exactly what is going to happen. So at the end of the day, plain semantics ain't gonna help us. That's not taking us forward at all, and it certainly isn't a proper basis upon which to ignore our cries for meaningful engagement.
Okay.
Right? Don't tell us, oh well, if you tell us what your concerns are, we'll tell you whether we'll
consider them or not.
I mean,
well, that's assuming they even read the bill, because that has been a problem.
Indeed.
But Sammy, one other question I have: so we know how the public can be coerced just if they need a government service. But what if they go to the bank? Can the bank then say, well, I can't help you without an ID card? There must be some protection in there that allows people to still use their passport or whatever and not have
there's no such protection, because there's nothing expressly there's nothing in this legislation, this draft legislation, that expressly says that no one should be prejudiced by the fact that they don't have an ID card.
Right.
That would take care of it.
Okay.
Yeah, they need to add that.
All right. So let's continue.
There's one thing I wanted to add. One of the callers called in last time saying, well, we need this, and I've heard this since. This is why I wanted to repeat it, what we said the other day. The fact that you get an ID card does not help with discrimination, In fact, it might make it worse, because if the complaint is that, I'm being discriminated against because I'm a Caymanian, how does proving that you're a Caymanian assist?
Yes, be identified even more.
I'm still struggling with that, Dwayne. And at the end of the day, it isn't about the card. I'll say it again. It's not about the card. We're concerned about the register and this registrar who has all these wide range of powers. That's what we're concerned about.
All right. After the break, please rejoin us.
They say variety is the spice of life. And that's why at Subway, we're introducing the new boneless hot sub.
Say what?
The premium sub brings new ingredients like spicy breaded boneless chicken, French's crispy fried onions, and buffalo wing sauce, bringing a zesty and flavorful experience with every bite. Add some of your favorite veggies, cheese, and ranch sauce of your choice of freshly baked bread for the ultimate boneless hot sub. For a little spice in your life, try the new boneless hot sub from Subway.
So good and tasty.
And make it a meal with a drink and chips or cookies. Subway. Eat fresh.
CUC reminds you to always be aware of power lines. Before operating machinery, erecting scaffolding, trimming trees, drilling wells, digging holes, or carrying out construction work near overhead or underground power lines, always check with CUC customer service team at 949-5200 or via email at service@cuc.ky to ensure your plan of action is safe. Safety first with CUC.
The offices of dermatologist Dr. Dwayne Porter will be taking appointments from December 2nd through the 10th at his Crew Road Clinic. Appointment slots are limited. Whether you're seeking advanced skincare, Botox, filler, cosmetic skin enhancements, or simply looking to reduce wrinkles, Dr. Porter offers a full-service dermatology and dermatological surgery practice. For more information, email dr.porterkman@gmail.com or call 946-9020 to book your appointment today. That is 946-9020.
So, you missed out on the Black Friday sales? Don't worry, Roro Variety has you covered. The tent sale is back, one day only, Saturday, December 10th from 7 a.m. T-shirts, 5 for $10. Jeans, you name it, Roro has it. Shoes, household items, bathroom accessories, towels, clocks, and handbags. The Roro Variety tent sale, Saturday, December 10th from 7 a.m. Roro Variety Store, Tropical Plaza, Smith Road. Call 924-9553.
Let me tell you something. I've been fishing our island since I was a boy, and it's getting harder and harder to get a good catch. Maybe it's because there are so many more people in Cayman than ever before. Maybe it's because of how the climate is changing. I don't know about that, but I do know that I want to be able to keep fishing and teach my children to fish one day as well. So it makes sense to me that we have certain areas and certain times of the year to fish for certain things. It feels unfair not to be allowed to fish where my dad taught me to fish, but I know that being patient now means we can keep fishing for many more generations. We're all in this together, right?
For more info, download the Cayman DOE app or visit doe.ky.
You know, Savannah Pharmacy saved my life.
Really? Was it the medication they got you?
No, not this time. I forgot my wife's birthday. They were the perfect place for last-minute shopping.
That's one way to give yourself heart failure. Don't wait last minute for Christmas. Savannah Pharmacy is stocked up for Christmas right now. Gifts for men, women, and children. Home decor, clothes, toys for all ages, fragrances, candles, handbags, and so much more. I was there the other day, and trust me, they'll even wrap all your presents too.
Savannah Pharmacy, a lifesaver in more ways than one.
Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village provides you with more than just prescriptions. Always just around the corner with everything your family needs for this holiday season. WhatsApp your prescription refills to 929-5045.
For medical lab services in Cayman, go straight to MedLab.
For a full range of medical services, pleasant, clean and comfortable environment, no long lines and affordable fees, visit MedLab at the Smith Road Plaza. Open Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and half day on Saturdays. Call 949-7331 to make your appointments.
For medical lab services in Cayman, MedLab.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners' participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waging to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon, welcome back, and thanks for joining us, and thanks too to both Bridget Colonel and Sammy Jackson for sharing with us as we talk about, the two of the bills before our Legislative Assembly, the Identification Register Bill and the Cayman's Identification Card Bill. I'm trying to read them specifically because I speak to both the first caller and others who have said, well, getting the ID card makes sense, so we need both to get one, and I'm keep coming back to that because I think potentially we're confusing the two and believe we need one to get the other. I think some of you have addressed that, but perhaps it may need.
Again, we're focused on the National ID Register Bill, not the National ID Card Bill. Okay. And one of our complaints from the get-go was that all we need is the national card ID, national ID card legislation, and we don't need this accompanying bill, which has so much massive, constitutional overreach in it, built into it. And I really don't know what's behind this. I don't know what the public policy is that informed government that it needed to do this in this manner. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the origin of this bill is, whether it was crafted by. I know that someone asked the government minister in my presence the other morning what the origin was, and it seemed to be a very touchy subject. Mm-hmm. But I I only say that because it is a remarkable bill. Why do I say that? Well, we're talking about taking the island forward into the 21st century. Using biometrics and all this other stuff that I admit I don't understand completely. Modern technology, the wonders of all of that, and obviously the risks that come with it. But when you look at Section 4.2 of the bill, it says it makes provision for the data to be the encryption of the data to be optional. The registrar may encrypt the data. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. I don't know what encryption means in the context of this legislation, but wouldn't that be a wonderful way to protect it? Why are you not encrypting it? Why are you not requiring it to be encrypted? Particularly because you don't have the sort of protection built into this legislation you have in the Data Protection Act. All right? So that in and of itself is a worry, because that makes it easier for the information to be accessed. Maybe the answer lies in Section 6.2b, which makes it clear that the registrar, the government or its appointed agent, will be selling access to the information. 6.2b literally says they'll charge a fee. I don't need to tell you, right? Now, bearing in mind we are talking about the personal financial information, right? Medical information. Why don't we have the kind of protection built into this legislation that is along the lines of what is in the Data Protection Act? This is so easily abused, right? And bearing in mind that it is also built into the legislation that the registrar will, and I'll tell you in a minute why I say that, it's in Section 14, will in fact farm out part of it's his duty. Let me go to it.
All right. And as Sam shares that, we'll go to the callers in a second. But so they will farm out.
It's Section 2, subsection 2b of Section 14 says, and this is particularly worrisome, it is a duty of the registrar. Say it as a duty, Not me. A duty.
A duty.
To contract the services of one or more providers of goods or services to establish and maintain the register and to perform any other duties in keeping with the establishment and maintenance of the register in the Cayman Islands identification card system. So it's right there, they're splitting the two, right? You see that, right? They're segregating the register from the... So what this provision is doing, first of all, is this is statutorily enshrining a concept where the management of the register and the upkeep of the register will be farmed out. That's what it says, literally.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, if you go back to Section 6.2b, when it says you'll charge a fee, then you got to worry. If there's no protection, right? If there's no scheme built into the legislation for the sale of this information, the sale of access to this information, we all know how valuable data is. Ask Steve Guttenberg, right? Or not Guttenberg, the owner of Facebook. Ask any of these folks who deal in data how valuable this is, and you will see that we have a real risk here. Because if you're going to allow not just the government, but a government appointed agent, private sector agent, to sell access to data, how are you going to regulate that? How are you going to regulate the price of it? It becomes so profitable. Who's to say that won't be abused? Right? How and especially where you have that built into a statutory regime or you have built into the statutory regime protections for them, right? Denying you the right to know who inspected your data. That's in Section 30.
All the exemptions under there. All right. Yeah. All right, let's come back to that. But let's welcome our callers. Bridget Kirkconnell and Sammy Jackson are our guests in studio. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for calling.
Hey, good afternoon, Sterling.
Good afternoon. How are you today?
Not so bad, my friend. Not so bad. Good afternoon here to Miss Bridget and Mr. Sammy there.
Good afternoon.
Well, I tell you, we really need stronger people, some more strong people like the two of them in this country. But what I am so tight. I don't even can't even find the words of what I want to really say in order, because of the way that you feel like you're just being compromise in a reform of life by our government in the way that they're choosing to run this country, lead this country by everything that the world do. They accept and just expect to ram it down in the throats of the people to do the same. Other people that have different views and ideas about this card, that it might be good and beneficial in every way, in form and fashion, but other people think about their private life. I this morning went to go fill out a form, and there's certain information that the people was asking me in the company to fill out. I had to stop and freeze myself, and I say, listen, I'm not giving you that kind of information on myself. Why it is that the government has to feel like they have the right, and we do not have the say to make these things come down our throat, and we don't have no laws standing for us that says that we have the right to choose as a people. Now it seems like the people doesn't have any sense of direction on which way to go, and that is why I called Sterling to ask that gentleman and that lady if they can set some type of meeting here on the block, because the people here are they're confused. They don't know what this card is going to bring them in future, because a lot of people thinks about the biblical part of how in the mark of the beast, these kind of situations, these kind of thoughts. We need some type of answers in order for us here on the block. It would be good if the two of them could come on the island here, set up a meeting at Ashton Rudder Center, that the people can understand more of what this is all about.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And before we go to the caller, Ms. Bridget.
Good for Cayman Brac that they want to know more. So full disclosure, Mose is my cousin, and I'm going to put him on the spot here because I have been telling the PPM for weeks, myself, Katina, Sammy, they should have weeks ago gone public and said, wait a minute, we brought this terrible bill, because it's a terrible bill, and they brought it, but we want to revisit it, and we want to answer the people's questions, right? They didn't do it. And it's not too late to put them on the spot, right? Because they're going to be debating this for a while, I hope. But, as much as Sammy and I probably would enjoy going to the BRAC, we've been shouting and screaming about this. We need to hold our members of parliament accountable, all of them, right? And so if I were you, I would send a text to Mose and say, when are you going to give me a public meeting? You're not going to get my vote otherwise. And also Miss O'Connor Connolly, who, I was my teacher, like her a lot, but, we gotta hold everybody accountable when something this important or matters, something this important happens or something that matters to us. They can't solve all your problems, like Sammy said, but they are the ones that should be holding the public meeting, because they're the ones that can get in the House of Parliament and ask the questions that you need an answer for. Right. And I support everything that you do.
Indeed, and just for the record, I want to make sure that everyone's clear on this. Since I was obliquely accused of being a PPM agent, which is a more ridiculous thing that I haven't had any conversation with anybody in the PPM. I've had somebody indicate to me that one of them, I think the leader of the opposition, would have appreciated if I could have given them my notes on the bill. My response was, I'm going to give everybody my notes. Mm-hmm. I don't see my job as being to do the job of the opposition. They don't particularly like me. I distinctly remember them dancing around on the stage wishing me dead, right? So I have no political axe to grind here. Mm-hmm. This is me as a concerned citizen with other concerned citizens like Bridget voicing our concerns. We do what we can. And as I said the last time, and as Bridget has said before, it is up to everyone else to prevail upon their representatives. Each and every person in this country who votes has a representative. Prevail in them. Mm-hmm. Ask them if they first start by asking, have you read this bill? If so, if the answer to that is no, then you probably will want to vote for somebody in the next election. If the answer to that is yes, then you ask them, what do you understand by it? Is it dangerous? And then have that discussion, mm-hmm. right? And by all means, read it for yourself. you don't need to be a rocket scientist to read legislation, but if you read this legislation, you need to read it carefully, because there's some things layered into it that are, a little bit esoteric to understand. But there are some things that are pretty obvious. When you look at section 2, subsection 2C of section 14.
Section 14, subsection 2C?
It says, provides more powers for the registrar or his delegate, whoever that might end up being, private sector, whoever.
But delegatas no putas delegares?
No, well, there is no limit on delegation.
Wow. Okay.
But that rule requires for the powers to delegate.
Okay.
So subsection 14(2)(c) says, provides more powers, albeit described as duties, right, for the registrar to establish, develop, implement, and monitor procedures, plans, and programs relating to the administration of the register and the Cayman Islands identification card system. What I'm saying, is that the registrar will have the ability to establish its own procedure, his or her own procedure. We're talking about a single civil servant here, by the way, right? I have more to say about that as well. We're talking about a registrar who has the power to further empower themselves with regards to the management of our personal data that we were hitherto protected against dissemination, sale, etc. by the Data Protection Act. But with the advent of this legislation, that registrar can devise the own rules under which he or she will operate, including and presumably if they delegate the authority to the private sector, then they would hand over, along with the reams to the registry, the ability to create their own rules. Now you imagine the absurdity of that. If you have a private sector entity managing this register, inventing its own rules, that's unheard of abdication of function.
Wow.
Government function. Delegation, aside, you have to ask yourself, what kind of world are you living in where you have a government licensing a private enterprise to require you to disclose to them? They're going to step into the shoes now of the registrar. They're going to run the registry. They're going to manage your data, all forms of data as they deem necessary that they wish you to disclose. And under threat of penal sanction, because they also then inherit those provisions, the penalty section, which although they're not as powerful as the ones in the data protection law, and I believe that's by design, because they want to limit their liability, right? Then you have the most absurd system I've ever heard of.
All right. We've got a caller. As we go to our phones, Bridget Kirkernel, Sammy Jackson are our guests. Hey, thanks for your patience for holding on. Good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon.
Hey, welcome. Good afternoon.
I'd like to thank your guests for coming on and talking about this important subject. I too stand with them and ask that everyone in the Cayman Islands contact their MP and ask their MP to withdraw the bill from the legislative agenda so that we can have a proper consultation about what is in these bills and the way forward. Because I understand very clearly a lot of the things that Mr. Jackson right there is describing, and they are dreadfully powerful and dangerous in the wrong hands. And I know that people might think, well, but, the PAC government seems to be a good government and they wouldn't do anything to hurt us. The way you need to look at this legislation is not in the hands of PAC. You need to look at it in light of a future government that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And that government might not like you. And in that case, what could go wrong? And I suggest to you a lot can go wrong. And let me give one example of a problem area that I see in it. And I've read this bill, both of those bills, more than once. And the section in there that allows for for a former MP to be the registrar is an extremely dangerous provision in my mind. The provision says that if the person has been out of office for more than 3 years, then they would be eligible to be in that position. And what you have to understand, the public needs to understand, is that, not like what Mr. Jackson said, knowledge is extremely valuable. And so what you would be doing is that you'd be putting all of the country's information flowing through one entity. And if that registrar in the future is a former MP, you're talking about trusting all of your information with a political animal. And you have to ask yourself, how partisan could that future person be? And that's a risk that I'm very concerned about. And I do believe that the fact that the government is just pushing forward on this gives me justification for feeling the way I do. They're simply not concerned with my concern.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not concerned, well, what will that mean in the future?
Good point.
Indeed. Thanks very much for that.
There's an added facet to that. Well, I think I addressed it the last time we were here, and this is this concept of creating a single civil servant entity.
Mm-hmm.
Albeit that we believe we know, based on what we've been told, that this will be farmed out to some private. That makes it only worse.
Mm-hmm.
But if ostensibly in the legislation, the registrar is a single person,
Mm-hmm.
right, a civil servant, that instantly creates the opportunity for conflict. That is not in conformity with what is accepted in modern democratic societies as being good governance.
Mm-hmm.
You don't empower single civil servants anymore to do that. The ones that we have left, those legacy ones from the 70s, we need to change that immediately to fall into conformity with the Public Authorities Act.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this before. Let alone create new legislation that takes a giant step backwards. You're talking about promulgating legislation for the purposes of taking us into the 21st century by you stepping back into the 70s and 60s. That doesn't make any sense. Why is that? So that you have a civil servant you can control. No civil servant should wield this kind of power. And particularly so when you look at the duties that they have under Section 14, right? And that includes under the power to write their own rules. And when you look at Section 15, it crystallizes that point by saying that all Cabinet retains is the ability to issue general policy directions and writings to the registrar in exercise and performance of the registrar's duties as a pair to Cabinet as being necessary in the public interest. So all Cabinet gets to do is issue policy guidelines. This registrar is an entity on its own, in him or herself, right? And that's scary. And that will have consequences. It has had consequences already. We are suffering from some of them now. And in other areas. So we need to be careful about that. That is not in conformity with modern, acceptable good governance standards.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see what kind of problems that can create, then you look at the following section, 18, which deals with conflicts of interest, which says where the registrar has an actual or potential personal or pecuniary interest, either directly or indirectly in a transaction, decision being considered by the registrar, or which may impact the performance of the registrar's duties under this act or any other law, the registrar, subject to subsection 2, shall disclose the nature of the interest to the chief officer as soon as possible after the relevant circumstances come to the registrar's knowledge, etc. What Section 18 does is imposes a duty on the registrar to disclose his conflict of interest.
What?
But it doesn't actually provide a way to ameliorate that. And it can't. You know why? Because the registrar is one single person. When you have a board with multiple members, any one of them, their conflict arises, they can recuse themselves.
Yeah, and they can step
I've sat on enough boards to see how that works. And it works fine without interruption, and it can efficiently continue to do the business of the board. When you have a registrar, And I've also seen, I've successfully challenged the Registrar of Lands before, where he made a decision where he had a glaring conflict of interest, and he had to reverse it. But only after my client spent thousands of dollars in grand court. So this isn't imagined problems that we're talking about here, and this is from experience. And why are we doing this? What is the point? Why would we take that giant step backwards in terms of good governance when we have on our books the Public Authorities Act that prescribes how public authorities, because all things statutory are now deemed to be anything that has a statutory remit that performs a government function is deemed to be a public authority, including Cayman areas for that matter. That's how wide the scope of it is. And for the purpose of that law, they have to conform to that legislation. And that legislation expressly displaces all of the legislation. Right? And I'm baffled when I see this kind of legislation being proposed now, in this day and age, on the basis that it's modern legislation when it doesn't conform to the existing legislation we have now.
But you remember you talked about, the whole implied repeal.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're stepping back as we step forward. As you go into the news break, Ms. Bridget?
Just a quick point. I realized in reference to the gentleman from Cayman Brac who called, I messed my answer up because honestly there is no time for any more public consultation as far as I can tell. The government are trying to push this through today. I suspect that they are probably about to debate it. And the only thing you can do at this stage, because they are determined to not hear from us in person, is to just keep texting them, blow up their phones with your messages, and put as much pressure. But I believe that I heard the Premier say he's going to be the one defending this bill. That's not the right word, maybe, which I thought was quite sponsoring the bill. I think that he's going to be doing it and not the minister responsible for it, which I find quite curious as to why that is the case. Why is the Premier doing this and not the minister? There's something absolutely driving him to make sure that this gets through today. So, there's not a lot that we can do at this stage.
All right.
Maybe Sammy has an idea.
Talk about it after. When we come back from the break, I think the last caller was still there. If you are and you wish to stay on, we certainly welcome you after this break.
Today's biggest news.
Radio Cayman. Your voice, your choice.
Local, regional, international. This is Headlines from Radio Cayman's newsroom.
Today's biggest news.
Fresh northeasterly winds along with rough seas are expected across the Cayman area for the next few days as a strong high-pressure system builds over the southeastern United States. Radar images show isolated showers around the Cayman area drifting towards the southwest. Partly cloudy skies with a 20% chance of showers are likely, while temperatures will rise to the upper 80s. Good afternoon, I'm Dion Anglin with your headlines and news elsewhere. Victor Bout, one of the world's most infamous arms dealers, has been released from the United States custody as part of a prisoner exchange with U.S. WNBA basketball star Brittany Griner. Griner has been in custody since February after Moscow airport officials found cannabis oil in her luggage while she was returning to the United States after playing in Russia. Rumors had circulated in U.S. media for months that senior State Department officials had sought to secure Griner's release in exchange for the arms dealer's freedom. So notorious are the exploits of the former Soviet Air Force officer that they inspired a Hollywood film and garnered him an impressively fearsome nickname. But who is the man known as the Merchant of Death? Bout was extradited from Thailand to the U.S. in 2010 after a sting operation by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency 2 years earlier. And an 18-year-old college student in the state of Arkansas has reportedly become the youngest black mayor to be elected in the United States. Jalen Smith just left high school in May. On Tuesday, he was voted in to lead the rural town of Earl, 30 miles west of Memphis, Tennessee. He is not the first 18-year-old mayor in U.S. history, but that hasn't stopped his family from celebrating the major win. That's a wrap of your headlines. I'm Dion Anglin.
For the latest in news and information,
follow Radio Cayman on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Download the Radio Cayman app or log on to our website, radiocayman.gov.ky.
Talk today.
But I do have some questions.
Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to the Bridget Kirkernel and Samet Jackson. We do have the last caller who was on, and thanks, and then we have another caller after that. Hey, thanks for holding on and being a part of a discussion.
Thank you. I know that they have two bills, a card bill and a registry bill. But an example of how that should be, how it should be viewed, is that you should have a card and a registry, so you'd call that the identification card bill, that would include just the register for the card, just a place where you keep track of which cards you have. But then the other component, which isn't being correctly described, is e-government. And so this is where all of this other murky stuff is coming into the picture. And it's these interactions and the rules around how that is to play out, except that what we don't see is we don't see the regulations. And so, and when I speak to some people, you know, they're talking about, well, this would be able to tell us that, say that we're Caymanian. And I said, well, okay, did you read the bill? And they said, no. I said, well, there's a part in the bill that says prescribed fee. I said, do you know what that means? And they said, well, they didn't read it. So I said, well, that's like going shopping for a car, but you're not concerned about the price. And anybody who knows anything about government knows that you're going to pay, right? And I'm sure that if you go to a bank, the bank is not just going to be happy to just look at it on a screen. They're going to want a copy of that information for their records. And so the question would be, well, how much is that copy going to cost me? Because you see, right now, we physically walk these papers to wherever we want them to go. But if you're going to hire someone else, meaning electronically, to deliver them for you, I would expect that there might be a cost. And so what would the cost be? We don't know these things.
Well, there's going to be all sorts of costs that are incurred by this, because obviously this would be a massive data gathering, data retention, data protection regime if it's done properly, right? If it ever comes to life, and the legislation, I think the provision you're referring to, Section 62D that I referred to earlier, the prescribed fee is for other persons paying the registrar to access the information of registrants. So that is going to, if that becomes exorbitant, let's just take an extreme example. Let's say it's farmed out to a private sector enterprise. Their costing isn't regulated in any way, or not regulated properly by the agreement between them and the registrar, and they charge an arm and a leg for access to data. Every business that pays that prescribed fee, because they have no choice, right? Because it's now mandatory for everybody to use.
Right.
That is going to get layered into the cost of doing business. So if you're talking about a Foster's or a medical service provider or whatever, those prescribed fees will multiply and translate into the increase in the cost of living. Is that what we need? I think not.
No.
And what benefit do we get in return for it? Oh, we get a shiny new biometric card? Wow. Why can't we fix the passport problem? And that's the thing that got to me. A caller called in the last occasion when we were on the air and said, well, we have the system we have now is broken. That's correct. But if we can't fix that, why are we implementing something much more complex?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that why we're farming it out to the private sector? And you look at the provisions, even the identity number. I was just actually, when we were off the air discussing that showing that to Dwayne. There's a provision that says, Section 21.2. This section provides that the identification code may be used, held, or maintained by a private entity or a public authority for any of the purposes referred to in the Section 3.1 in accordance with this Act. Even our identity right? So remember now, the whole premise upon which this enterprise is posited is that your data is going to be protected because you're going to be anonymous, right? You're going to get assigned a number, right? And only the gatekeeper of the identification code gets to relate that number to data. But if you're going to farm out the holding, right, or using of the identification code itself to the private sector, how are you going to guarantee that that's not abused? Where's the protection in this legislation? And for all of those people that think that this is nothing, right, what they should do is take this piece of legislation, read it in comparison to the Data Protection Act. Because I did that last night, and I nearly fell off my chair, because the reality is the Data Protection Act is real solid legislation. It might not be perfect, I don't know. It's probably beyond my pay grade to determine that. But I can tell you this, it has all the requisite protections for data in it, right? This legislation that severely impairs and impacts the legislative regime under the Data Protection Act is nothing in terms of protection. It waters down all of the fines. It provides outs for let's just say breaches of the law. And even in instances when you can prove a breach of the law, it's a $10,000 or $20,000 fine as opposed to a $100,000 fine. That's significant.
Yeah.
Why is that?
And
what is the policy decision? What drove that policy decision that all of a sudden protection of our data is less important? Consequently, the penal sanctions can be reduced by a factor 10. What's the purpose? What drove that decision? That's what I'd like to know.
There's lots of things that needs to be answers that we need, but I'll leave it at this and say that what essentially is happening right here is that government is asking the private sector how many copies of the key to the hen house does the fox want.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
You need to be very careful, because if you think that the government has trustworthy issues, then you don't understand how dangerous the private sector can be.
No, I do.
Yeah, but thank you very much. And we can take one more call before the break. Welcome, good afternoon, thanks for calling.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon to you, Sterling.
Hey, good afternoon, how are you?
Yeah, I'm okay, and how you doing?
Blessed, man, blessed, healthy. Thank God for mercy, grace, love, provision, protection. I mean, favor. I got it all, man.
Bless the Lord.
Amen.
And also, good afternoon to your guest there, Miss Kokano, Bridget, and to Sammy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I've been listening intently listening to your conversations back and forth, and I'm not going to be as argumentative as I was last time. I have perhaps a few questions.
Ready ahead.
It's easy for me to say, because it's Sterling, I don't want to come across in your books as being cantankerous to your guests. So I'm going to be as respectful as I can. So I'll say this, that nothing has changed since I last spoke with you as a declaration up front in regards to the fact that I see nothing crazy, and you asked that question about whether I read the law. I have gone and looked at it much more than I did the first time.
Well, thank you,
but I don't need a whole heap of paper to tell me when something is pretty straightforward. And so even as I listen to your guest, your very learned guest, talk about some of the concerns, I guess I can only have questions based on what I just heard a while ago. So I do have a few questions that I'd like some clarity on.
Okay.
So Sammy, when you refer to farming out to the private sector, are you referring to the fact that I don't know what that noise is, but it's bothering the heck out of me.
What are you hearing? Are we not hearing anything?
Yeah, well, it's gone now.
Okay.
You talked about farming out to the private sector. Are you using that word to indicate when companies have need of getting data from the registry, or are you using that very loosely to say that they can wholesale farm out our data? Because that's not the impression. Before you answer, that's not the impression, or the clarity that we got from the minister presenting on another radio forum and his team in regards to one who retains the information, the data, who manages it in the whole nine, that it's the government. and that it's not being farmed. That they specifically say that. So I'd love some clarity on that. And then you so rightly mentioned the data protection law, a law of which I also have very intimate knowledge on, because I've used it against a company locally, and the judgment from the Ombudsman Office was ruled in my favor. The very dirty. Well, let me leave that alone. And I haven't spent $1 with them since February of last year because of how very scheming they were. So I know the data protection law very well, and you rightfully said it's a sharp piece of legislation that protects us. And I was the one that raised to you, Sterling, last week about the very learned gentleman that he should refer to the data protection law in terms of understanding how our data is protected, handled, and you said, if anybody's read the data protection law, well, I would suggest that all companies in Cayman, because the law affects all companies in the handling and storing of our personal data. In fact, we can all write to any company to ask them what data they have on us. So I want to say, he mentioned then that Sammy mentioned that any new legislation that comes on automatically, or for the most part, and forgive me if I got it wrong, but my takeaway was that it automatically supersedes any sort of old structured law. What basis are you making that statement, and what grounds are you making that statement?
I explained that. I did explain that.
Well, maybe I missed it, and I would love if you could share it again, because I don't understand how you would think that would supersede the data protection law. In regards to the protection of our data. I can't see that happen. It makes no sense. And you're right for saying that if it wasn't referred, you would think that the drafters and the legal drafters would be cross-referencing legislation. And in fact, they do that all the time. They do it in committee stages, or they make amendments based on the correlation of laws. So I'd love if you could please clarify where on what basis you made that. And last, I'd like to say that thank you both, though, for seeking to bring some clarity from your perspective on it. I'll just say that I don't see the boogeyman in this. I saw a lot of other legislation that we had to leave with this. I saw a lot of other legislation or bills that we have proposed and done otherwise, where we were very careless, and I didn't think it was in the interest of Caymanians. I would have loved if the government perhaps if this was the main reasons why we were driving at the interest of Caymanians having to constantly prove who they are in the midst of this country that's seriously diminishing us in so many ways, and the carelessness of the companies that promote that and propagate that. I would love if the government had just made it a Caymanian ID card, and we would do away with all this other foolishness and make it very straightforward. But I still think the registry goes in tandem with it and helps to frame out and bring together the sense of a data protection with all the technology and all the considerations and all that sort of thing. But thank you very much.
Okay. Now, before I ask Bridget or Simon to respond, we're just going to take the final break. Sort of a cliffhanger. The question was asked. It'll be answered. Stay tuned for Talk Today.
Busy. Feel like there's not just enough hours in the day. Savannah Pharmacy, service to make your life easier. Now you can WhatsApp your prescription order to 929-5045. And pickup is just around the corner with everything your family needs and convenient opening hours including Sundays and holidays. WhatsApp your prescription order to 929-5045. Savannah Pharmacy, wholesome values with modern conveniences.
For medical lab services in Cayman, go straight to MedLab.
For a full range of medical services, pleasant, clean and comfortable environment, no long lines and affordable fees, visit MedLab at the Smith Road Plaza. Open Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and half day on Saturdays. Call 949-7331 to make your appointments.
For medical lab services in Cayman, MedLab.
Freedom, Cayman Brack. Freedom, Little Cayman. Soft breezes, blue waters, no traffic. Unwind and rejuvenate your mind, body, and soul. Sister Island Staycations, a taste of freedom. Discover all that our sister islands have to offer.
The Kirk Freeport Christmas Sweepstakes is back again, and for our 50th anniversary, we are giving away $50,000 in cash and prizes. Win one of 3 $5,000 cash prizes, a daily cash prize of $1,000, the Rolex draw on January 4th, or loads of other great prizes. Every purchase of $100 before noon on Christmas Eve qualifies for all remaining prize draws. Win your share of $50,000 of cash and prizes in the anniversary sweepstakes. Full details on KirkFreeport.com. Merry Christmas from everyone at Kirk Freeport.
Talk today.
But I do have some questions.
Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners' participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back. Thank you all for listening and sharing with us and providing an opportunity for, civic engagement. Hopefully, we'll be not only involved but educated and informed. In the studio, Bridget Colonel and Sammy Jackson. Thank you so much for being present. The last caller had left us with a question as we continue to try to answer that. Ms. Bridget?
Yes, thank you for that question, caller. So as I was looking into this and I spoke to various firms, I discovered that, yes, the data will be, it might remain with a firm on island, but that firm is probably going to send the data away. So then I looked at the request for proposal, which was issued 8th of January 2021. And when you look at the request for proposal, you realize that the intention is for our data to be farmed out. So I'm going to read a section of it. It says the CIG prefers not to be the certificate authority and does not currently have the resources to support and manage a certificate authority. Any proposal which would require the transfer of personal data outside of the Cayman Islands must be able to demonstrate that it would be in compliance with the 8th principle of data protection. That is, the foreign jurisdiction provides adequate levels of protections for the rights and freedoms of data subjects in relation to the processing of personal data. There was also something in the request for proposal that that the help desk people speak English. Mm-hmm. There's other stuff that I cannot remember right now, but also I have learned that some of our data is currently stored in Spain, and nobody has contradicted me on that yet. And I think I've said this a couple times, but so that is that. Aside from the fact that it's in the law and it gives them the ability to do it, the request for proposal makes it clear that we don't have the expertise currently.
Okay. And Sammy, he was asking, which I appreciate the layman's perspective and you reading and citing as you did. Sammy is a legal scholar in the room.
Well, to answer the first question, where do I get the notion that it'll be farmed out? I think I read earlier section 14, 2B. Mm-hmm. I'll read it again. Section 14 says, 14.1 says, the registrar shall, and 2 says, in performing the duties of specified subsection 1, the registrar may, this is all under the heading of duties, right? Mm-hmm. Contract the services of one or more providers of goods or services to establish and maintain the register and to perform any other duties in keeping with the establishment and maintenance of the register and the Cayman Islands identification card. Then we have provisions that refer to even the identification code in section 21.2. This section provides for the identification code. It literally says the identification code may be used, held, or maintained by a private entity or public authority. Mm-hmm. Now, when you couple that together with the intel that Bridget just shared, right, which is that there are private enterprises in the Cayman Islands, we know already, that the cards were purchased. We know that the equipment necessary to, load the information on them, I don't know what it is. That's already here. And we know that there was a request for proposals, and which has probably been answered by now, mm-hmm. by bids. Mm-hmm. And one of those enterprises has indicated that they hope to gain the business, and they're private sector companies. Mm-hmm. So if you think that if that's not enough to convince you that this is going to be, and I didn't mean to use the term farmed out, outsourced. I'm so sick of saying that word anyhow, because I've said it so many times in another context of another legislation. But that's as far as I'm concerned, more than enough proof for us to say, right? At least to posit the observation that it appears likely that government is going to, and certainly the law allows it. That should be concern enough. And the caller was expressing concern about how the private sector behaves. The previous caller before that said the same thing. I'm not here to castigate at private sector or compare them to the public sector. The problem is when you have a single civil servant who can then abdicate their function, delegate their function to the private sector, and the function is what is encompassed in this bill, that presents a frightening perspective for me, right? And the question about the Data Protection Act, I'll say it again in case the caller didn't get it the first time. The doctrine of implied repeal works like this. Wherever there are conflicting provisions that appear in new legislation, that is to say, they conflict with existing legislation, unless there's a savings provision in the new legislation that saves the old ones, right? Says that they shouldn't derogate from them or whatever. The new legislation takes precedent and displaces it. So I think the caller should perhaps take some legal advice on the implications if he holds the Data Protection Act in such high regard, which he should. He should take some legal advice on what the implications of this bill is as concerns that existing legislation before he dismisses the bogeyman, right? And the reason I say that isn't just imagined. You know, sometimes when you read legislation, you get concerned not just because of what is in it, but what it isn't in it. What do I mean by that? Section 29, subsection 3 says, a public authority using data held in the register shall adhere to the principles laid out in the Data Protection Act 2021 revision for the processing of personal data. Now, why is it that the law specifically limits public authority using data it access, right, to adhere to the data protection law, but there's no reference to the data protection law elsewhere in the legislation, other than the definition section where it defines personal data, which isn't used in the legislation except in that very provision I just read. So you got to wonder, right? If the law doesn't say that the registrar is subject to the Data Protection Act, doesn't that mean he's exempt? He or she is exempt? If there's mention of it in a specific circumstance directed at other statutory authorities when they're accessing personal data, then and a complete pregnant silence elsewhere in the legislation about who else is bound by the Data Protection Act, and when you have a regime which spells out how data is to be managed, handled, accessed, shared, paid for, all that in a new piece of legislation, and that piece of legislation doesn't refer back to the Data Protection Act, then you may have a problem. And that's all I'm saying. Has that exercise been undertaken? I posed it in the form of a question, and I said, I say it again, if that hasn't been done, that's a dereliction of duty on the part of government, right? Because they need to consider whether they're causing injury. Because I think people expect and believe that the Data Protection Act, the regime set out in the Data Protection Act, will be upheld, including the fines. And the fines proposed in this law are 10 times less in some instances than what is in the Data Protection Law, Data Protection Act. So why is that? I don't know what more we can do. I can say this again. I don't have any political horse in this race, I'm here doing what I can to try to inform the public. It's up to them whether they inform themselves, though, at the end of the day. They don't need to take what I say as gospel. And they don't need to take any advice. They can continue down the path to their oblivion if they wish to. But for those who want to know, right, what this means, I'm here, and Bridget's here, to provoke a discussion that hopefully will motivate them to inform themselves better, right? not on just this, but all legislation, because at the end of the day, and it's our civic duty, right, as those folks who have the ability to understand these things, to raise it, to try to inform the public so that they can hold government accountable, because that is all our collective responsibility, holding government accountable. No government should be approached with anything other than skepticism. That's the healthy approach as far as I'm concerned. Everything they pass, ask questions. What's wrong with that? If you have a government that's adverse to you because you ask questions, you have a bad government, ipso facto. That's the problem I have, and that's because that comes from a totalitarian mindset. I'm doing this now. We've consulted the public enough. We're moving forward with it, and this isn't the first time we've heard this, This isn't the first time we've heard this from this particular individual, right? And it's not, and it's coincidentally, it's always the same time of year when everybody else is busy wondering about where they get enough money to buy toys for the kids for Christmas and that sort of stuff, that we end up dealing with this kind of controversial legislation. This has happened to me twice before, 2013, 2016, and was at the hands of the same gentleman. So I say that to make the point. We should be a little bit careful. Maybe we should ask a few questions of all of us should ask a few questions of our representatives. What is this really about? Did you read it? Do you understand it? And what's wrong with postponing it? To the point the second to last call I made. Why not call your representative and say, hey, I hear this discussion about this legislation. I don't know who to believe. Is there any opportunity for us to engage in that? Can I speak to you about it and see what they say? At the very least, do that. Because I'm here to tell you, this legislation, and again, I'm not serving any purpose in saying this. I wish I could be doing other things, more pleasant things than being here talking about this. But I think we all need to take a careful look and consider whether this thing is that turning point where that point where we go, when we step past it, we go from being a free democratic society to being one led by a government, either present or in the future, who has control of all of your data. Because once they own that and they can digitize it, they can do with you as they wish, right? That is where the world is probably going to go anyhow, in terms of digitizing currency and all that sort of stuff. We see that every day. We don't know yet what we're looking at, right? But a lot of us that have good instincts are concerned. So that's why we're asking questions. And the fact that we're not getting answers to the other caller's point is reason for concern. The minute you get brushed aside when you ask what you think is a valid question without explaining, well, if they said to me, well, your concerns are unfounded, and here's why, then we would have to shut up, right?
Right. Well, Simon, thank you very much. Closing thoughts, Ms. Bridget.
Oh, I don't know if the caller's still on the line, but I really appreciate him pushing us on this and saying, well, why do you think that? Because he needs to do that. Well, and hopefully we're providing a very good reason for why we think the way we do. But ultimately, we should be able to ask our elected representatives these questions. We have to remember that in the end, the public in general has been denied the opportunity to comment on this bill. Let's not forget the meeting that we had, or the when we were on talk today a week and a half ago or whatever it was. There was the government only ever consulted with a small amount of people, right? That's completely unfair. Then they've told us that, we're going to make these amendments, but we've not seen them. And so, it's just been a very, very unfair process in my view. And let's stand as a community and make sure that, we are not reduced to just having to submit our complaints online. Because you know what? Bet you they don't read them. They don't care. They don't want to face you in public, and that's the conclusion I've come to. I think they're not having town hall meetings because they can't answer some of these questions. And I might be completely wrong, but we should not accept this from our elected representatives. When they told you they wanted your vote, I'm sure you thought that they would continue to engage with you, not be in an ivory tower where you can't reach them.
Okay. Well, thank you both. Thanks for listeners, for their contributions.
We just scratched the surface, Dwayne. There's other things that we haven't discussed specifically. But there's a whole raft of things that I'm going to share this with the public, so they can do with it as they please.
Well, I think it's a good sign of a healthy democracy when private citizens are willing to share publicly their thoughts and concerns. I think from what you shared, it's incumbent to be able to have healthy democracy when we can engage those whom we elected. In the absence of that, we question whether we are in a democracy. I trust that no one here today leaves in any form, facet of being offended, but actually, encouraged to be informed and perhaps reach out to our elected representatives to at least engage in discussion. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, well,
thanks.
It makes me feel good to know that the service and sacrifice of those who've gone before relative to fighting in wars, and as Mr. Lockstall always shares, the champions for freedom and democracy is alive and well in the country. It's not about picking up arms, it's about engaging in locking arms and hearts and hands to serve our interests.
Well, I guess it's our duty as citizens to engage in whatever war we need to engage in to defend whatever cause is right and just for the country.
Exactly.
And that's why I feel obliged to do my part.
Well, thank you both.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, please join Mr. Orton and for the record. Please continue to engage your elected representatives. It's not too late. Even if the legislation now passes, at least you've had a chance to speak and perhaps be encouraged to do so with respect to future proposals. All right. Join us tomorrow and continue to be informed and engaged. Until then, be blessed.
Talk Today is brought to you by Subway, open 24 hours in Countryside, Anderson Square in Georgetown, and Centennial Towers in West Bay. And by the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your sister islands. MedLab in Smith Road Plaza, your complete medical laboratory solution. Call 949-7331. And Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village, convenient opening hours including Sundays and holidays.